今さら自己紹介かよ。まあいい。KK だ。名前は捨てた。
KK マリオ頼む。
Hey, it's Max19. Welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is on Ghostwire Tokyo. After the Amazon fiasco of a couple weeks ago now, you can, what is it? Right here, click the card, whichever side it's on. Click the card, you go look at that. It'll give the explanation for that. I played the Prelude visual novel. And, on, like, the day after I recorded for that, the game showed up. So I was like, okay. And I've been playing it for a little bit, not too much more, playing Elden Ring. There's a video for that as well, if you want to check that out. And now I can finally sit down and play Ghostwire Tokyo. You know what that means. Time to kill the Slender Man. Probably shouldn't have sharp objects, so we will put this away. Ghostwire Tokyo. You saw the montage? Yeah. Anyway, so before I get into the details, I've played for about like little over 7 hours. I am level 16, and I'm still in chapter 2. I've been sort of messing around in chapter 2, doing a bunch of stuff, and so that's only as far. I'm not that far in. Secondly, I want to get into some technical things before I get into the gameplay. The game has a bunch of visual graphics modes. And at first, I tried, what was it called? High frame rate quality mode. And when I did that, the opening cutscene played through, and there was a lot of screen tearing. So I swapped from the high frame rate quality mode to the high frame rate quality mode with VSync, and that seemed to fix the screen tearing issue. So on PlayStation 5, if you're having a screen tearing issue with the high frame rate quality mode, switch to VSync, and it should work. I'm assuming there's some relationship between the screen you're using and the console that might change that, but the screen tearing did show up on the recording, so I don't know if it's what the issue is there. And on PC, you'll probably have an entirely different experience. So I played it on a PlayStation 5. In addition to that, when I first started playing the game, I was playing it on the PC using PlayStation Remote Play. And it took me a while to figure out the sensitivity, and then realized that it was just the latency from PlayStation Remote Play. So some of the footage might look like I'm all over the place, and that's because I'm trying to figure out how to get the momentum to feel right or whatever. But it was just a problem with Remote Play's latency, and all the time that I've played directly on the PlayStation 5 on the TV in the living room, I've not had any of that problem. The only problem is that I'm not amazing at the game, but that's just how game works, so it is what it is. This game isn't really a horror game. It kind of like when it was first announced felt like it could be, but it's really more just, it takes a lot of inspiration from Japanese folklore, ghost stories about yokai, and as well as just like J-horror creatures, like stuff like that. Like there's a lot of that imbued into this game. And I think in some cases it sort of fits more around like science fiction, where like some of the descriptions of how the stuff works makes it feel like there's like technical reasons to why some of this stuff is happening, rather than it just being like, ooh, spooky. You know, there's like a technical functionality to some of this. I've not gotten too deep into all of that, but that's just what it seems from an outset. I'm not sure I would call it science fiction exactly, but I think it has some of the elements that you see in science fiction put into this sort of horror-inspired action-adventure, I guess. Talking about the game, like, in a superficial manner like that, the game's aesthetic and atmosphere are really great, and, like, honestly, for me, at least, worth the price of admission. I got the deluxe version, so I spent, like, $80 on this. And I also pre-ordered it so that I could get the Hanya outfit, so I can run around as Hanya Man. That's a Yakuza reference for everyone who knows about Yakuza. I've been calling the villain Hanya Man the whole time, because that Hanya outfit that you wear is just the villain's outfit, and I haven't progressed it far enough to see whether cosmetics show up in cutscenes, because the cutscenes that I have seen were all before the clothing customization part unlocked, so I'm not sure how that works, and I haven't progressed to another cutscene yet, I don't think. So, I don't know, but I think it'd be funny to have two of him in a scene like that, because I have quite the sense of humor. To get back on topic, narrative. It's got a pretty bit of interesting little story. It's got that like narrative intrigue that I think I've mentioned in other things, where there's something going on, and the way that the narrative is set up makes you want to continue forward and figure that out. It's got like this mystery over top of it. So I think the narrative setup that it has so far, again, I'm only like 2 chapters in, so I'm not very far into the story. That narrative setup has a lot of potential for some really interesting stuff. There's been a lot of interesting, like, visuals to go along with some of this stuff. So I want to see where all that goes and what it all means. And hopefully that ends up somewhere at some point. Now to get into the more gameplay side of things, it's an open world game. There's been a lot of open world games, especially in the last few years, and they've been of varying quality. I think the most interesting thing about the open world in Ghostwire Tokyo is that a lot of times when you're in cities and open world games like this, they're very limited in terms of like where you can go. Like before I got Ghostwire Tokyo, I sort of blazed through finishing Spider-Man Miles Morales, and you have that open world city, but like it's just the city. And you do have quite a bit of verticality, but there's sort of just like not a lot of interesting like stuff that much. Like it's fine. It's a fine open world, but like it's not like the height of the example of an open world sort of thing. I think the thing that's interesting about Ghostwire Tokyo is that when you're dropped in, it feels like it's going to be one of those open worlds where the openness is just street level. But then you start, like, doing some side quests, doing some stuff here and there, and you realize that, like, there's a lot of verticality to this world that you wouldn't expect. And there's also various interior sections that are accessible without, like, going into a new loading zone. There are a couple that I've found where, you go to open a door and you load into a new area. Most of those, I think, were part of a quest or something, a side quest or something. But there's, like, these sections that are interiors of like lower levels of buildings that would be like whatever, but like you go in the shops, those are just part of the world. Like there's not a loading zone, you just walk in there, and I think that it just makes it feel more like a lived-in world, especially with like you have all like the screens that are playing stuff. A lot of the shops and restaurants are playing music. A lot of there's a lot of stuff, just like, because like in the narrative context, everyone in this section of Tokyo has just disappeared. This fog rolled in and turned everyone into ghosts, basically. So there's clothes strewn all over the streets, there's cars just laying around. Like, this world really feels lived in, like people used to be here, and that they were just suddenly gone. Like, it wasn't like the people, like, were like, oh no, we're all gonna leave. The people were suddenly gone, and so all this stuff is just left how it was, you know. I think that stuff really lends to the world feeling a lot more interesting of an open world than some of, like, other games. Like I mentioned before, in Spider-Man, like, you got the stuff going on, but, like, because as Spider-Man, you're sort of swinging by, you're not walking street level, there's a lot of detail in the street level that is just, it's not that there's no detail, it's just sort of not as detailed because the player isn't going to be there. Whereas in this game, you're sort of everywhere, in a sense. And so, like, it all just feels a bit more there, just designed to be the situation. Like, it just gives the world just more feeling. As I mentioned, I played on PS5, and so, as such, I was using a DualSense controller for my playtime. And I think that since this was, like, developed sort of as a console exclusive, it takes a lot of advantage of the stuff the DualSense controller does. In particular, its detailed haptics and the touchpad and the speaker in the controller. The haptics are very subtle. Like, there'll just be times where the controller is doing a subtle rumble, and, like, you just sort of, just to give you that feeling that something's happening. And a lot of times it coincides with, like, when you're near enemies, there'll be a noise that comes out of the controller, and along with that, you'll get that subtle rumbling that, like, just leads to that experience being a lot more in your hands. You know, you just sort of feel it a bit more. And like I mentioned, the speaker, there's a variety of things that the speaker and the controller does. There's a situation where you can find these audio recorders left by a character, and the audio recorder, the thing that the character is saying comes out of the television, but then, like, the static of the recorder comes out of the speakers of the controller, since you're probably too far away from the TV to really hear that noise if it was in that audio. And so it just gives you that audio recorder experience. And then there's also, in the game you're playing as Akito, who is possessed by another character called KK. And when KK speaks, since he's a ghost in your head, basically, his voice comes both out of the controller and out of the TV, giving you this sort of, like, weird chorus phase to give him that, like, ghostly sound, so that it sounds like he's in your head. And they do a lot of that sort of stuff with the controller that is interesting. I mentioned the touchpad. There's, like, some seals that you do for certain things. Just certain time you'll come across, like, a thing where you got to do little hand signs. And one of the things you can do that with is the touchpad. I've not had the most success with it. I've mostly just used the right thumbstick. But you can do that with the touchpad. You can also directly switch to, like, your main weapon types using the touchpad with the different swipe directions. It's a lot more than a lot of other games will use the touchpad for. So, you know, it's cool that you can tell that, like, the hardware was in mind as part of development. This game has this ability to be very, like, cool and striking and depict things like the Hyaki Yagyo, I think I pronounced that right, the sort of Night Parade of 1,000 Demons, I think is what the sort of English version of that is. And, like, you can see that walking by down the street in, like, a certain section. That's really cool, and it has this really, like, striking lived-in world that is just very visually great. And I've taken a bunch of screenshots of it just and posted them on Twitter and whatnot. But at the same time, it has the ability to be, like, have this, like, silliness and lightheartedness. Like, I did a quest and I unlocked the Fallout 4 jumpsuit because Ghostwire Tokyo is published by Bethesda. And then, like, there's all the dogs that you can pet, the Shibas. Like, all the dogs are Shibas, and you can pet them all. And there's all these cats, and you can pet the cats. And, you know, you can talk to the cats and the dogs, or at least read their thoughts. You can give the dogs dog food, and they'll dig you up some money. There's all these, like, lighthearted things to the game that, like, really lend to it. Like, in the photo mode, there's some, like, more silly poses that you can have Akito do. Like, I did one of the screenshot, and there's this dance that you get for connecting your Bethesda account to the game. Like, there's just like, it does a good job of sort of balancing like the cool and the striking and the stylishness with the sort of fun lightheartedness. I feel like this is something that comes up in a lot of Japanese games. This is something that I think the Yakuza series does very well, is that balance between like cool and like powerful, and while you're in the Yakuza series, you're this like big crime boss dude, but you can also just go do karaoke or hang out with hostesses, and there's all these like weird side activities and side adventures you'll go on, despite like the main story generally being like kind of like really serious crime drama stuff. Like that series does a really good job of balancing that. And I think that this game, how much I've played it so far, also has a really good balance of sort of like the cool and the lightheartedness. And so like it bleeds in a lot of this lightheartedness to sort of balance out the tone, but it doesn't overcorrect and make the cool and the seriousness less important. And for one last thing, as a sort of a downside here, I know that in some other reviews that I've seen of the game, they've mentioned that like there's some stuff that can be repetitive, and as far as I'm in right now, I've not reached a point where I feel that the game is repetitive, but I feel that it could be. The combat is interesting and cool to look at and very flashy, but like you're not exactly doing that much as like in terms of your interaction. You're pressing a couple buttons, like you're mostly hitting this button and hitting this button sometimes, maybe clicking in the stick to do a melee and moving around, and you might switch your weapons. And there doesn't seem to that there are that many more things that I'm going to get. There's certainly going to be more things that I'm going to get as the week goes on, but I think I already have the sort of base set of abilities already for the basic version of what I'm going to be using for the most part. So like I can see that getting a bit repetitive, and like the side quests are no Witcher 3 side quests, if you get what I'm saying. And so like I feel like as the game goes on, you might run into that repetitiveness. But as it stands right now, I think the everything else makes that repetitiveness, that potential repetitiveness of the future, seem less of a problem from my perspective as someone who's only like 7 hours in, but like only 2 chapters into the story. So that's just my little bit of a negative to balance out my relatively positive review here. And as you can't tell, Game Pass is trial. I'm definitely going to play more of it. I'm considering at this point doing a wrap-up on it when I'm done, but I have a couple wrap-ups that are in the works, that are in various phases of production. So we'll see when I get around to finishing it and when I get around to actually making a second video, if I decide to do that. So the camera's running out of record time, and I've been rambling a little bit and did some stupid bits here and there. So I'm gonna let you go. So yeah, Ghostwire Tokyo is cool. If you like the video, hit the like button. Down in the description, find links to all my places. Subscribe if you want to keep up with this and other shows. Share the video, leave a comment. Do the things. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Yes!